guys, and welcome back. So the first top 10 will be top 10 poisons of medieval era, and in medieval days, actually poisoning was vast and more common than you would care to realise. But there were some particular poisons that were quite notorious. Not only that, the medieval people were terrified of being poisoned. So we have monkshood, or aconite, also known as aconitum nupellus. Aconitum nupellus. It was originally called Odin's helm, or Tyre's helm, after the northern gods. Of course, it's not called that anymore. We know it as monk's head. But it was also defined as being the plant associated with Hecate, the moon goddess of the witches, together along with Deadly Nightshade, was one of ingredients that actually go into the flying ointment, a powerful hallucinogen which I do have, I can make, and I do sell. I grow my own quite well, actually. It's very lethal, to be fair. It is lethal to touch as well, so it's important to understand that if you're going to touch or mess with things like this, to do it properly and learn about them first. Of course, it was in many ointments, not just that. Such as the werewolf's ointment was said to have these ingredients too. Again, they're powerful hallucinogens, so why not? In Roman times, it was punishable by death to even think to grow any of those. You would be punished by death. The juice was frequently used in warfare. It was used as the poison choice of warfare. It would be put in such sources that the enemy lines, it would be put in their drinking water. If they could get it into their cups, even better. But mainly it was easier to access their local drinking area where they would put in the poison and kill the enemy. It was favoured more by lower classes because they would use it to dispatch troublesome spouses or other family members. But the nobility, the ones with power and money, would actually prefer hemlock. The lower class went straight for the monkshood with the Deadly Nightshade usually. Of course, hemlock, it's a bit different. Conium, moculatum or moculatum. And this is the devil's blossom. It's definitely not one to touch either, and you must wear gloves always if you're going to mess with any type of these, of course. It will cause extreme dizziness and numbness and then death, probably, depending on the dosage now. I think dosages make a big difference, but back then you have to understand that a dosage was not looked at. It was simply just used, and that is that. But the extreme dizziness would usually lead to them fainting anyway, causing death. The methods in which they would use this, they'd actually force people to drink hemlock back in medieval times, and it was usually prisoners or the condemned. They would say, they would make them drink it. They would also associate witches with this plant and the devil because it symbolises death by poisoning, so that's how they linked it back to witches. And it was not uncommon for them to make witches heat hemlock without doing anything with it, but to just literally shove it in the mouth, which is unpleasant to say the least. There's also the Spanish fly. The Spanish fly is the cantharites, but it's more commonly known as Spanish fly. It's made from emerald green blister beetle, and it's a more earlier sort of powerful version of Viagra for men and women, and it was generally used to be put in drinks with spiked drinks, causing the victim to become sexually aroused, but extremely highly sexually aroused, by the way. Too much, of course, was fatal. I think it was Marquis was tried for accidentally killing prostitutes at an orgy by feeding them aniseed-flavoured Spanish fly pastels. I can't even imagine that, you know. It was the favourite poison of certain people, and it was usually mixed as well. They would choose it and mix it with arsenic. When mixing it with the arsenic, it would be placed in drinks, and it would take about 4 drops to kill a person. They had a way as well of being able to identify if you'd been killed from poisoning of Spanish fly. The victim's organs were ground up in oil and smeared on shaved rabbit skins, and if the skins of the rabbits started to blister, it was said that the cause of the death was the Spanish fly poison. Like I say, this version being that usually it was mixed with arsenic. We're at number 4 already. Deadly Nightshade. A troppa bella donna. This was very well known as more of a sleeping aid, believe it or not. It was believed to have been the poison added to the water wells during the Pantheon Wars, which killed Marcus Antonius' troops. It killed all of them. That was the 16th century. The Scots, who had signed a truce with the Dane, obviously, were able to take advantage of the truce to add the juice of Deadly Nightshade into the Danish's water sources. The truce was essentially fake for them to get closer, and when they got closer, bingo, they slipped it in, didn't know. It actually didn't kill the Danes. It did make them drowsy, so they did attack and destroy them, but it did not kill them, because remember, we're looking at Danes here. They did a lot of hallucinogens anyway, so no, it just made them very sleepy, which, you know, is sort of different. Now, there is a poison recipe that it's medieval, and it's kind of in the book, you know, in a book of spells. It's the Grand Grimoire, and I'm not sure if you have the recipe, but if you want to prepare it, take a new glazed pot. You need to add red copper nitric acid, verdigris, arsenic, oak bark, rose water, and black soot. It takes a long time to collect and prepare the ingredients, but the mixture is then boiled, and it has to be boiled for around an hour after each ingredient has been added, so it is a long process. So, you know, it can take anything really from, you're looking 5 to 8 hours boiling time alone. But when it's complete, you have the composition of death, it is known as, in the Grand Grimoire. That's if you want to make any. Then we have, this is number 6, and it is the fly garrick, and it is called Ammonite muscaria. Ammonite muscaria. It's a fungi. It's got white spots on it. Classic sort of pixie toadstool, I guess. But it produces a sensation of being drunk, then delirium. Death usually occurs 24 hours, possibly afterwards. Not always. Deadly fungi were very popular poisons in the Middle Ages because they were so easy to obtain without anyone knowing. You know, you would simply slice it to bits, add it in stews, steep it in milk. But they did use it as some sort of cleaning aid to kill flies. So it were a fly killer too. So it would be found in homes generally, you know, it would be about in homes, it would be everywhere. So it wasn't thought of as a poison as such, but more of an aid for killing off flies. And to find it in the home and in the kitchens wasn't necessarily, oh, well, then you're a murderer, you know. So it was one thing that was so obvious in front of everybody's eyes. that they didn't really look at it as a poison. But they are quite deadly. They would give stomach cramps and diarrhea and delirium, convulsions, vomiting. And those symptoms could easily be mistaken for different sort of from eating bad meat, or bad cheese or something like that. So it weren't often thought that this person had been poisoned at first, because they would give normal food poisoning symptoms and then they get worse and just die. And that happened pretty quick. Number 7, pig's blood and saliva. Now, it would have to be a fresh pig, of course, because fresh pig's blood is actually harmless and it's used to make blood puddings. But medieval Italian poisoners were experts in the art and had perfected a poison made by allowing a pig carcass to decompose, then mixing its blood and saliva with arsenic to create an exquisite poison, combining both the mineral poison and the toxins produced from putrefaction. So yeah, that's basically eating decomposing pigs. Toads. There's many different toads that are poisonous anyway, and I think we know this, it's the skin that's actually poisonous. But in medieval times, it's possible that they do say King John was murdered by a Knights Templar or a friar who had squeezed a toad inside the king's goblet. The fluid dried, creating an invisible coating, and before the king, obviously, he didn't check it, didn't have it checked or anything, and it produced a pretty lethal combination with what the king drank anyway, and it killed him. So it's a conspiracy, but who knows? European toads do excrete two poisonous substances through the skin. They have numbing, they call mild hallucinogens, though they are nowhere near as toxic as the toads and frogs of South America. So bear that in mind. Number 9, bacterial poisoning. So virus and bacteria, as we know, it's everywhere anyway. There's things, but the past centuries, they would use decaying corpses as poison. It was quite lethal to the living. They'd put it in water supplies, as they would do with everything else, really. They generally use it against armies, and they would be kind, and then obviously get in the crowd, and once in the crowd they would put it in their supply of water, supply of whatever they was eating, and it would definitely do them some harm, that's for sure. And they weren't really particular about what corpses they were using. They didn't care at all. Now, generally, they would use animal carcasses, but they wouldn't just use one. They would take a multitude of animal carcasses all rotting and would create a blend of, dead animals to give to people, I guess. But yeah, these festering wounds would come from this kind of poison. And to be fair, if any got on the wounds of the armies, because remember, they used to target armies that had wounds anyway, then it definitely caused extreme infection, and eventually it would kill them, but there'd be a lot of torture beforehand because the pain and the symptoms would be excruciating. And the last one, number 10, is arsenic. Obviously, you can't have a poisonous toolkit without arsenic. It's known worldwide. Although the symptoms of slow arsenic poisoning, they're not really recognised until the 1700s. They didn't actually know. They didn't guess until later that that's what it could possibly be. They was always looking towards the other poisons, of course. But BC and the alchemists believed it to be a key ingredient of the philosopher's stone. Nero may have used yellow arsenic to murder his step-brother, that was Britannicus, so he could become Emperor of Rome. But it was the 8th century that Arabic alchemist Jabir Hayyan became the first in Europe to produce white arsenic trioxide, by roasting, and he did this apparently, Roasting opponent and inadvertently produced the poisoner's dream, the first reliable and lethal poison that was odorless, tasteless, and colourless, and would work in powder, solution, or gaseous form. So that's why arsenic became such a trending thing. But when you look back in history, the reason it wasn't the first choice is because actually they didn't know enough about it. And it was not tasteless, and it was not, it was, people would notice back then, but not now. So there is a nice little box of poisons if you want to have them. I don't know why, but you might, who knows. Put to one side just in case. Love and light and many blessings. My mother told me someday I would buy